Everyone cheered when they kissed, but the groom collapsed seconds later. The sun cast a golden glow over the garden, filtering through delicate lace canopies and glinting off crystal glasses arranged perfectly on each table. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass, wrapping the scene in an air of serene celebration. Friends and family filled the white chairs arranged in tidy rows, all eyes fixed on the couple at the altar. There was laughter, the occasional sniffle, and smiles so wide they seemed to stretch into forever. The bride, radiant in a flowing ivory gown, clutched the groom's hands tightly, her voice steady but full of emotion as she spoke her vows. He, dressed in a crisp tailored suit, gazed at her like no one else existed in the world. Every word, every promise exchanged between them, felt sacred, an unbreakable bond formed under a cloudless sky and the approving gaze of loved ones. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and a collective cheer burst from the crowd. As they leaned in for their first kiss as husband and wife, camera shutters clicked, applause erupted, and joy hung thick in the air. But then, in the space of a breath, everything changed. The groom staggered, eyes wide, and collapsed to the ground. A stunned silence followed the groom's fall, as if time itself had been shocked into stillness. Then chaos exploded. The bride screamed his name, her bouquet tumbling from her hands as she dropped to her knees beside him. Guests surged forward, confusion written across their faces, some shouting, others fumbling with phones. The cheerful music cut off mid-note as gasps and cries replaced the once joyful clapping. The groom lay motionless, his eyes half open but unseeing, his chest eerily still. The best man, who had only moments ago been grinning beside him, pushed through the crowd and knelt beside his friend. "Someone call 911, he barked, already loosening the groom's tie and checking for a pulse. His hands moved with urgency, practiced but shaking, as he began CPR. The bride hovered, pale and trembling, whispering, please wake up," over and over. A distant wail of sirens finally pierced the confusion, growing louder as red lights flashed beyond the garden gates. Paramedics rushed in with their gear, splitting the crowd like a wave. The best man stepped back, sweat beading on his forehead, as the professionals took over. Electrodes were attached, oxygen supplied, and questions fired. Had the groom been ill? Allergies? Pre-existing conditions? No one had answers. The bride stood frozen, clutching the edge of her gown like a lifeline, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Just minutes ago, she had kissed the love of her life. Now, she watched helplessly as strangers tried to restart his heart. The vibrant scene of their wedding, the laughter, the flowers, the perfect moment, had disintegrated in an instant. No one knew what had happened, but the message was clear. This was no ordinary feint. The celebration had ended. Now it was a race against time. They met in the most ordinary way, through a mutual friend at a crowded college cafe, both reaching for the last almond croissant. She laughed, offering it to him, and he insisted she take it. That brief encounter turned into a 2-hour conversation over coffee, and from that day on, something about the world shifted. It wasn't fireworks or fairy tales. It was comfort, like finding something you didn't know you were missing. From study sessions that turned into late-night strolls under campus lights to spontaneous weekend road trips where they talked about everything from childhood dreams to favorite authors, their connection grew fast and deep. He'd leave little notes in her backpack. She'd surprise him with his favorite takeout on stressful days. There was an ease between them, an unspoken rhythm that made their bond feel timeless, even in its early stages. When they graduated, they moved into a small apartment downtown. He pursued a high-pressure career in finance, working long hours and rarely taking breaks. She noticed the strain, sleepless nights, occasional dizziness, the way he clutched his chest sometimes when he thought no one was watching. But whenever she voiced concern, he would smile, kiss her forehead, and say, "I'm fine. Just tired." She believed him because he made her feel safe, and they had plans: buying a house, starting a family, growing old together. He proposed on a quiet evening under a string of backyard lights, slipping the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. She had no doubts. Now, standing outside the emergency room with his fate uncertain, her mind spiraled back to those moments. the love, the warnings she'd dismissed, the life they had only just begun. In their storybook romance, no chapter had prepared her for this. The blare of the ambulance siren seemed to pulse in rhythm with the bride's heartbeat as she sat in the back, clutching her groom's lifeless hand. He was strapped to a gurney, tubes connected, paramedics shouting readings and commands over the chaos. His skin was pale, his lips tinged blue, and every second that passed felt like time was slipping through her fingers. She kept whispering his name, as if saying it enough times might call him back. When they reached the hospital, he was rushed behind double doors while she was left in a sterile waiting area, still in her wedding gown, stained with dirt and sweat. Her makeup had long since smudged away, replaced by the streaks of tears and disbelief. Nurses moved quickly, machines beeped in harsh tones, and doctors huddled with furrowed brows. They were confused. His vitals had dropped again. No trauma, no obvious reason. Just a healthy young man suddenly fighting for his life. Friends and family began to trickle in, forming hushed clusters in the corners of the waiting room. The best man paced, fists clenched. Her mother cried softly, her father spoke with doctors. Theories emerged: stress, a heart condition, something he'd eaten. But no one knew. No one could know. The bride sat alone, fists clenched in her lap, staring at the emergency room doors. She refused to imagine a world where he didn't walk back through them. This wasn't how their day was supposed to end. This couldn't be the end of their story. As the hours stretched into an endless wait, the bride was pulled aside by the best man, his face tight with worry and hesitation. He held out a folded piece of paper, creased from being opened and read too many times. "He got this 3 days ago," he said quietly, eyes darting toward the doors of the ICU. "He didn't want to worry you. Said it was probably a prank. But no, I don't know." She unfolded the note slowly, her hands trembling. The message was short, scrawled in uneven handwriting. "Call off the wedding or you'll regret it. This isn't a threat. It's a promise." Her breath caught in her throat. The letters blurred as tears welled in her eyes. He had never mentioned this. He had walked down that aisle smiling, calm, pretending everything was fine. Had he really believed it was just a joke? Or had he been protecting her from something darker? She sat back down, the note clutched in her fist. Her mind raced. Who would do this? An ex with unfinished feelings? A jealous acquaintance? Someone from his job? He had mentioned pressure at work, stress piling on before the wedding, but not like this. Never like this. The best man shook his head. "I told him to report it." He brushed it off. Said he wasn't going to let some anonymous coward ruin the happiest day of his life. Now that happiest day was hanging by a thread. As monitors beeped faintly beyond the doors, the bride realized they might have walked straight into something sinister. What they had assumed was fate could have been sabotage, and someone out there might be responsible for the collapse that changed everything. Several hours later, a doctor finally emerged from the ICU, his expression grave. The bride rose instinctively, her dress rumpled and stained, eyes bloodshot from crying. "He's stable for now," the doctor began, "but we've found something unusual." He paused, glancing at the small group of family members gathered behind her. "There are compounds in his blood suggesting exposure to a toxin, something that wasn't naturally occurring. It could have been ingested recently." The room went silent. The words didn't quite register at first. Poison? That seemed impossible. This was their wedding day. He had eaten the same food, drunk the same champagne, kissed her under the same sun. The bride stammered, "You mean someone did this to him?" The doctor nodded solemnly. "We're running a full toxicology panel, but based on preliminary results, this was no accident. He didn't collapse from stress alone, he was poisoned." Her knees buckled slightly as the best man caught her. An officer appeared shortly after, already briefed. "We need to treat this as a possible criminal act," he said. "We'll need the guest list, access to the caterers, anyone who came in contact with him in the hours before the ceremony, and any threats he might have received." She handed over the crumpled note, her heart sinking further. The realization swept over her like cold water. Someone at their wedding, someone they knew, had tried to destroy what was supposed to be the most sacred day of their lives. The wedding was no longer just a celebration. It was a crime scene. And as the police began their questioning and sealed off the venue, what had started as a love story was now unraveling into a mystery darker than anyone could have imagined. 1 year later, the sun rose over a quiet lakeside cabin where the world moved a little slower, a little softer. Inside, the groom sat by a window with a warm mug in his hand, staring out at the still water. His eyes, once bright with ambition, now held a constant flicker of guarded awareness. He was alive, barely. But survival had come at a cost no one could have predicted. The months following the wedding had been filled with physical therapy, neurological checkups, endless tests, and even more unanswered questions. The toxin had been identified, but the source had taken longer. It wasn't until investigators traced the cake delivery to a temp hired just days before the wedding that the pieces began to fall into place. The man had used a false identity and disappeared the moment the chaos erupted. Further digging unearthed the truth. The attacker was a former disgruntled colleague of the groom, fired years earlier after being caught embezzling funds. No one had suspected a thing at the time, but the man had harbored a long, burning resentment. He had followed the groom's career from afar, watching his successes pile up. When he learned about the wedding, he saw his moment. A chance to destroy a life that had risen while his own had collapsed. The suspect was eventually caught trying to flee the country and now sits behind bars, awaiting sentencing. Justice, perhaps. But peace, that was harder to come by. The bride and groom live now in a state of cautious gratitude. They had stayed together, bound not just by love but by shared trauma. Their wedding photos remain tucked in a box, too painful to display. Their story is one of survival, but not without scars. Trust is something they rebuild daily. Joy is quieter, deeper, but always underscored by the memory of how fragile everything truly is. Still, every evening they kiss, not out of habit, but with purpose. The kiss had marked a beginning, but none of them expected how quickly it would become a fight for life.